We play and call it work.
Hey everybody, Matthew and Andrew here from MiniWarGaming.com, and welcome to this video where we're going to talk about the new Death from the Skies everything. Now, before we go any further, it's not optional to use a new Death from the Skies. No. It says this replaces all the rules for flyers. It's kind of a big deal. Jury's still out for me whether I actually like the change or not, but it doesn't really matter. I'm going to be playing a couple battle reports with Andrew and with his brother, where we're going to try out the new flyer stuff. But before we do that, I wanted to make this video because already we need to make some house rules for it because some things aren't very clear in it. So it already needs an FAQ. So I'm not very happy about that. But maybe it'll end up being a lot of fun and make up for it anyways. So this video, we're going to talk about what the Death from the Skies brings. Now, this is not a full review. We're going to have a much more in-depth discussion about it in our post-game discussion after the battle report for our Vault members. This is more meant to have a quick discussion about the house rules that we're going to have. Although when I say quick, this might end up being a longer video anyways because there is a lot to discuss. Yep. So let's take a look at the new flyer stuff and just have a good discussion about it. Feel free to leave your comments and what you think that the house rules should be, or what you think that the rules are supposed to be in certain areas where they're not clear. Anything that you want to talk about, I'd love to hear from you. So let's take a look at the flyers. Now, there's a lot of changes that come from the Death in the Skies book, and like I said, they're not optional. Of course, if you're playing with your buddies, you can always choose not to use them, but it does feel kind of strange that a supplement that comes out becomes something that you have to do.
Basically, yeah, so you have to do in something that changes it not that much at all. Well, in lots.
It changes it tons, actually, because it introduces flyer wings, it introduces the dogfight phase, and they even pretty much replaced every single flyer rules with the ones in this book. Now, for the most part, that's just to give them a few extra stats that we're going to be talking about.
The flyers themselves seem like basically unchanged. It's the rules that now apply to them that get massively updated. Oh
yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're right. The flyers stats are pretty much the same. I think we looked through it and didn't find.
Yeah, I know my flyers are not touched. I don't know about yours. I think these guys here, the Stormtown's got upgraded to like +1 armor.
Yeah, they're all listed as armor 11.
Yeah,
which is a pretty big deal. And this is still armor 12, obviously. Still 2 hull points. Now let's go through a few of the changes, and we're going to have to make some house rules on it. So the first thing is every flyer has received 3 new stats: pursuit, agility, and a combat roll. So the combat roll makes it either a fighter, a bomber, or an attack flyer. Yep. Fighter is your anti-air, your attack flyer is anti-ground, and your bomber, of course, is the guy that drops bombs. Only fighters can choose to have Skyfire now.
Yep.
That alone is a huge change.
I mean, especially since like something like this, which is I'm believing now just a ground shooter, basically.
No, I think the Storm Talon. Let me double check. We're going to have to be doing a lot of fact checking while we're talking, so you'll have to excuse me as I do double check. Storm Talons are you're right. They're attack flyers.
Yeah. So now these guys don't get the -1 whisk skill because the fighter now can only shoot full whisk skill at other flyers.
Yeah, if you're a fighter, you get -1 ballistic skill against ground targets. Yeah. Now remember, skimmers, jet bikes, flying monstrous creatures, they don't count as ground targets, they count as air, just like in Strafing Run. But these guys, yeah, you're right, they're attack flyers, so they cannot Skyfire.
No.
Unless they're controlling a Skyfire objective or some sort of special rule gives it to them. But
yeah, so shooting in dogfights, these guys are still shooting snapshots even though they're in the air. Or is that's how it works now, right? Well, the
dogfight we'll talk about. That's totally separate. Forget about dogfights for a second because all of that is just wholly different. So, but no, the answer to that is no, not necessarily. Okay. Even bombers and attack flyers in dogfights could fire at full ballistic skill, although they're not likely to, as we're about to find.
Yeah.
So the combat roll really changes that. And the combat roll also matters because of the new attack patterns. When you're flying in your flyer wings, which is also something new, you can assume different patterns, which we'll talk about in a moment. And then depending on your combat roll, it gives you different benefits. Now the other thing it adds to it is pursuit and agility. Agility allows you to make an additional 90-degree turn in your movement. So if you have an agility stat, it's like strength or toughness or whatever. It's usually from 1 to 6, or 1 to 5 is what I've seen. And at any point in your movement, you can take an agility test, and if you pass it, you can turn an additional 90 degrees. So when you move with a flyer, at the very beginning, it can already turn 90 degrees. But at any point in your movement, even right away, so I could make it turn 180 degrees if you pass an agility test. Now the agility of a Storm Talon is 3, the Storm Raven is only 2, and all the Eldar ones and Dark Eldar ones, of course, are 5 because these guys are the
fastest.
They're the fastest,
around.
bestest pilots in the galaxy. But it really does change the dynamics of where they can go. Like if he's facing this way, normally, sorry, if he was facing like this way when he came on to engage a fighter right here, there's a big blind spot of where he can end up. But now he could turn, move, and then if I pass an agility test, which in his case is a 50-50 chance, I could turn again and be facing this way, which is normally a blind spot for him, and then I could continue my movement as well. And so that's a pretty big deal. The pursuit number adds to their flat out distance. In this case, he has a pursuit of 3. So instead of flat outing 12 to 24 inches, he would flat out 15 to 27.
Yeah, that's big.
Yeah, it gives him a little extra distance. He might also be something that you don't want because it does increase the minimum as well.
Yeah.
Now, if you're ever stunned, your pursuit and agility are 0 while you're stunned, so that's important to know as well. And then the pursuit and agility matter in the dogfight phase as well, because they help to break ties. They also help to just affect the outcome of that, which we'll be talking about in a second. And so you see a wide range of pursuit and agility values. I guess these are kind of give you the average idea, and I think Valkyries, and let me check the Valkyrie for a second. Yeah, see, Valkyries are pursuit 1 and agility 3. Now, one thing that's interesting is they forgot to put the Vendetta in there.
Yeah.
On their Facebook page, when they posted about Death from the Skies, somebody asked the question, hey, what about the Vendetta?
Which they said use the Valkyrie profile, which is kind of funny because then the Vendetta is what, 4 twin link blast cannons or something like that?
3 twin link blast cannons.
Yeah, which would make it more of a flyer fighter or even a all-purpose fighter. What the Valkyries are, what, just a...
The Valkyrie is an attack flyer. We got it right here. But it does seem strange to just by default assume that a Vendetta is the same as a Valkyrie. Now, it could be 3 last cannons. That sounds like an attack flyer, because typically last cannons are your something against anti-ground.
Most vehicles, not so much infantry, but still.
Yeah, exactly. Because usually, if you're an anti-flyer, you'll have more shots at like strength 7 or strength 8 kind of thing. But it does mean that this guy right here, Storm Raven, all those awesome anti-air weapons that he used to have, he could have multi-melta, twin glass cannon, all his missiles. They only have to snap fire. Yeah. Or they can only snap fire at other flyers. So it really changes the game when all of a sudden all the Space Marine flyers, except I think the new one is a fighter.
The new one is a fighter, and its weapon has Skyfire. Its basic weapon has space weapons.
Yeah, you can upgrade it to have the Icarus Storm Cannon, which actually has Skyfire, and that matters. You might think, well, why does it matter if a fighter has a Skyfire weapon? But that'll matter in the dogfight phase, as you will see, because in the dogfight phase, it means he always fires full ballistic skill, even if certain other conditions apply. Yeah. Yeah. So the new Stormhawk is their fighter. So you can buy a kit with a Storm Talon that actually also makes a Stormhawk. I ordered some of those in, so we'll be having those in future battle reports. But until then, we're not going to be trying them out. And they're 12, 11, 11 on their armor, which is pretty impressive. And they're still only Pursuit 3 and Agility 3, but the fact that they're a fighter does give them that Skyfire ability. So these things have turned into an anti-ground gunship, which I know you could maybe claim that that's what they always were, with like a Typhoon missile launcher, assault cannon. That sounds more like a ground thing. Yeah. So it's just I often use them as interceptors.
Well, and they did a great job as anti-fires too, considering most fires are only armor 10 all around.
Yeah, they're just the assault cannon, 4 shots, strength 6.
Rending too helps.
Twin linked rending. Now the twin link can still help. I guess I could still fire a twin linked assault cannon at a flyer. But, hitting on 6s re-rolling doesn't sound that great.
At least you're going to get maybe one shot, maybe 2, if you're really lucky 4, which is...
Yeah, not likely.
Yeah.
4 6s, even with re-rolls, that's going to be hard to do.
What's on the orcs shooting out now?
Yeah. Oh, the orcs don't care. They're only ballistic skill 2 anyways. Although a lot of them have advanced things for their flyers as well.
Yeah.
So that's the big changes in just the regular game. But, oh, no, sorry, that's not the only big changes. Also, we have attack patterns. Now, this is where... There's just too much to talk about here. I think this video is going to end up being like an hour long. But the attack patterns is a big, big change. And it's something similar to what we saw in the old Apocalypse with the vehicles. From the same formation, they could like line up and gain Tank Hunter, or they could all line up in a straight line and flat out faster. Or there was different formations that they could take, or safe formations. We're going to call them attack patterns because formations is something different in this game. Yeah. But when we look at the attack patterns, I'll show you a couple of them. This is where we've really had to house rule. Like, for example, here's this image. I'm trying to make it so you can see it. So this is the vigilance attack pattern. Now, you might think, well, this looks pretty straightforward. Just have 2 of them, and it says 2 to 6 inches away. But when you look at the rules say a flyer wing must have 2 models, so exactly 2, to adopt a vigilance attack pattern. And the flyers must be in the pattern shown in the diagram below. Both must be facing the same direction.
Which brings the question then, because while they can be on your side, how far is it before they're past that degree? Like, could they be here? Could they be up to here? Here even? Like, so long as one slide back and one slide forward, does that still count?
Yeah, we know that with the one thing. There's 2 things we know for sure. 3 things. 1. 4 things we know. Spanish Inquisition. The first thing is that they have to be 2 to 6 inches away from each other. And remember, we don't use bases; we use hulls for vehicles, even flyers. The second thing is they definitely have to be facing the same way. So even if this guy's off by like that much, they're not facing the same way. And the third is there has to be exactly 2 of them, not 3, not 4, and not 1, obviously. Even if you have a flyer wing of 4 fighters, and by the way, each flyer wing can only do one pattern. 4 of these, well, that's a different pattern altogether.
Different pattern now.
So but that's not 2 vigilance patterns. That's a different one. But the question is, when you look at the diagram, it kind of shows it on a 45-degree angle to it. So were they intending only 45-degree angle, so it can only be right in here, or were they just saying that it has to be just behind and to one of the sides? Because they have the one picture I showed you showed it to the right, but then there was another little picture that showed it to the left as well. And so our house rule is going to be very lenient, because I already know that because of terrain and everything else, it's going to be hard to get these guys into these attack patterns.
Yeah.
And so our rule is that in that picture at least, you have to be to the side and behind. So this right beside each other does not count, and right behind each other does not count. But anywhere in here is fine as long as you follow the 2 to 6 inch rule. And we've made a house rule, which is not clear there, that you all have to be in the same flying mode. So this can't be a zooming while this is a hovering. It just doesn't make sense. There is no rule in the book that says that. It's just what we've decided for now until we hear otherwise. And we also talked about vertical, like if this is sitting on top of a building, we still are going to measure the diagonal distance. So if there's like somehow a tall building where this one's all the way up here, this is not in the attack pattern, even though I think it should be. It just feels weird one way or the other to say it is or isn't.
Yeah.
So we'll do diagonal distances if we have to, but that's pretty forgiving, because when you measure from the bottom of one to the top of the other, you got a good leeway here. So that is one of the patterns. You have other patterns like the Vehemence attack pattern. That gets a little more complicated, because you might think, well, that just looks like a triangle, but then the question would be,
yeah, you have one like this, one like that, where one's just slightly behind, still within the distance of the or 2.
Does it count?
Yeah.
And our answer is yes. We're going to say that. This is 2 to 6 inches. This is 2 to 6 inches, and this has to be 6 to 12 inches. So you have to make sure it's far enough away. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you might get, as long as you're doing it, you might get all sorts of different patterns that you could pull off. Once again, this one has to have exactly 3, and they all have to be facing the same way. So those we know.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so we're kind of adopting that kind of methodology to it. But it is technically a house rule.
Yep.
Because there's no answer. Like, how can you argue when you look at this picture? Somebody could say, well, rules is written, or rules, it has to be exactly the way in this picture.
Yeah.
The only lenience is the 2 to 6 inches and 6 to 12.
In which case, then, if you like your board filled terrain, like how do you measure that then? Like if you had buildings all over the place.
You just never do it.
Yeah.
Now maybe Games Workshop does mean for it to be exactly like this, because look at the amount of terrain that they use in their tables, which is to say hardly any. And that's what they've been adopting recently in their battle reports and White Dwarf and stuff, is they only use their terrain, which is very, very limited. Where if you watch any of our battle reports, we know that we use lots of it.
Another real difference would be like if you just did all flyers battle, then
that's a little easier.
Yeah.
But it would still be really hard to get these exactly in those spots. Just if you've ever moved flyers around a table, you know it's hard to be really precise.
Not to mention they'll have to move 9 degrees when they fly anyway. Even with the new agility rule where they roll, they still are moving 9 degrees at angle.
Yeah, it's going to be hard.
Putting them all on different table edges at different angles. Start off with.
It's going to be hard to pull it off.
Yeah.
So I want to be a little more lenient on it, at least at first, until we play our first game and see how it works out. Because I feel that it'll be hard to pull it off anyways. Mm-hmm. And then we get interesting ones like the intolerance pattern, where you're like, well, how does that work? Is it all in a straight line in a diagonal? And we're just basically saying, well, look at it, the first one, and look at the second one. As long as they're all to the same side, then you could have like that, and that would be that pattern, because he's to the right and behind, and he's to the right and behind as well. So it doesn't look exactly like in the book, but let's face it, if you say it has to be a straight line on a diagonal, it's never, ever, ever going to happen, except when you first come in from reserve. That's the only time, because that's when you have a lot of control of where your flyers go. But a piece of terrain is going to get in the way, a model is going to get in the way.
Especially when 4 to 6 inches of clearance they can have.
Yeah, that's tough. This pattern's a little more straightforward. They have to be directly behind each other, and that's what we're saying, 2 to 4 inches. Then there's this pattern, which is more complicated, but we just have to kind of stick to the rules that we said. So if we look at this 3 as the 1, and then we just kind of add that 1, then the main rule here is that it just can't be between.
Yeah.
So it has to be to the side on one of these. So that's pretty straightforward. So now that we've established those guidelines, the rest of them kind of fall into place. This one, they have to be directly beside. Not the same distance from each other, though, just 2 to 4 inches each. And then you have this one, and we're saying this one has to be a rectangle.
Yeah, so it can't be slightly back like that. It can't.
Yeah, even if like the front one lines up, and you can say, well, this one lines up with the front, and this one lines up with the front, and they line up with each other. We're saying that it has to be a rectangle. So like this, or tighter, as long as they follow the 2 to 4 inch rule. In the case, that's this one. And I think that's all of them. Yeah, that's all of them. Because then we have the dogfight phase, which is holy moly complicated.
Yeah.
So that's our house rules for that. Now the dogfight phase, a couple of questions came up because of it, or at least one did. We're going to not go through what the dogfight phase does. If you want to see that, watch our battle report. We're going to make sure we do the dogfight phase in our first one. You could choose not to. You can both agree not to, but we're always going to agree to, at least for the first part, because we want to see it in action. But the big question is, in the dogfight phase, essentially there's 2 flyers that end up fighting each other, and just 2. And you put them aside. They have to be in reserve, so they're not actually on the table. And you start them 36 inches apart, and then you accomplish a few phases. And in the end, you see how far away they are, and one of them could possibly be facing 90 degrees or 180 degrees in the other direction. And that determines who gets to fire at full ballistic skill and who has to snap fire. But what it doesn't tell you is what facing. Because if these flyers end up like this, the rules say this one gets to fire at full ballistic skill, and he fires a snapshot. But when you look at it, you're like, but how could he fire a snapshot? His weapons are all facing the wrong direction. Now, you could make arguments that, well, maybe this is a turret weapon mounted, or a turret mounted weapon. But let's face it, the majority of flyer weapons are forward facing. And so why would they say this is snap fire when he clearly can't fire at him? But I think that this is more meant to just represent, it's kind of like a little mini game that tells you what kind of shots you get to take.
He's in the air trying to shoot backwards, and that's what's happening with it.
Yeah, that's why he's snap firing. So basically we're saying that regardless of how they end up, the only thing that matters is distances for your weapons and whether you snap fire or not.
Yeah.
And you follow those rules. But then the other question becomes, well, if we don't care about facing, then which facing do you hit?
Which matters, only matters for like the Helldrake or other bomb.
Well, the new flyer from these guys is 12, 11, 11.
Yeah. Flyers like that.
The Helldrake.
Facings, yeah.
Yeah. There's in the Tau flyers, there are enough of them that we have to address it. Now, all the ones you see on the table right here, they're the same all around, so we don't care. And so our answer right now is we don't know if this is meant to hit the rear facing or if it's just always meant to hit the front facing, and this just represents whether they're snap firing or not. And so our answer is basically the one that's straight on firing at him, it hits the facing that it's facing.
Yeah.
And the one that's snap firing, whether he's facing like this or like this, hits the front facing of the opposing flyer. And that's the best we can do for now, because it's not very clear.
No.
Which is probably a motto we should say for the 40K rules.
Yeah, I mean,
well,
it's been that way ever
not
since.
Very clear.
It's just, you use your best judgment, and hopefully it comes out that everyone is happy with it, really is what it comes down to.
Yeah, so these are our house rules for now. Let us know in the comments below if you agree or disagree. If you disagree, then give us reasons why or how you would do it. And make sure you, obviously, this goes without saying, but I'll say it anyways, make sure you read through the rules for the Death from the Skies, and if you have a chance, before you comment, actually pull out a couple flyers of your own, stick them on the table, and try to reenact some of the rules from it, so you can get a little better feeling of how we're going to do it. And that's exactly what we're about to do, because we're going to play a Beat Matt Bat Rep with the new flyers. Probably Space Marines versus Eldar is what we're planning. And so that should be out. I'm not sure if we're putting this video out before that, but if today is Friday, then they're already up. If today is not Friday, they will be up on Friday. So thanks for watching. Happy working.